So everyone, we've heard in the lead up to this quite a bit about the role of the universities and quite a bit about the role of local government. But now we have an opportunity for you to engage with two people to shape the way that the funding shapes what the universities do. And this is an enormously important opportunity for you because this is really about national government policy. It's about understanding their roles are important in shaping that kind of debate at the national level and bringing it down into what we can do in the universities by the way in which they shape the funding that's possible. So I think that I'm going to introduce them and then we're going to ask a few questions and then please get ready to ask your questions. Okay, that's it. So let me introduce first of all Professor Julia Black, who is President of the British Academy, which is the UK's National Academy for Humanities and the Social Sciences. Professor Black is also Strategic Director of Innovation and Professor of Law at the London School of Economics and Director of SYNC, a social sciences mission-based incubator. She's very well placed to talk about. And also with us is Professor Alison Park, who is the Interim Executive Chair of the Economic and Social Research Council of the United Kingdom. And prior to joining ESRC, she was Professor of Social Research and Director of CLOSER, which was a very significant ESRC-funded collaboration based at UCL's Social Research Institute. And what CLOSER was doing, and this is important for the work that the IGP is doing with its citizen scientists, was a leading UK longitudinal studies, so bringing together the UK's longitudinal studies with the British Library and the UK Data Service to maximise the use and value and impact of longitudinal study. So that's one of the questions we'll be returning to. But perhaps I'd like to start first of all with you, Julia, and just ask you. So the British Academy has had a very important role in emphasising the importance really of social sciences and humanities in British public life and what it means. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how that journey has been and what role you think there is for citizen science in pushing further innovation and understanding that role.
Absolutely. Yeah, so thank you very much, Henrietta. Thank you very much, everybody. Fantastic to be here. I've learned a lot so much already this morning, and I think it's incredibly exciting. It's a fantastic initiative, so really, really excited to be here. So as Henrietta said, one of my roles is as the President of the British Academy, and what we have from government, but also from charities and other foundations, funding which we then distribute to researchers in both the UK but also internationally. Quite a significant international research programme. And partly what we do there, we are quite responsive to what it is that people are searching for in terms of the types of research that they want to do. But we also seek to try and, in a way, shape some of that by shaping the reports that we put out. And we do fund what could be seen broadly as citizen science projects. I think it's an interesting question here in terms of what that covers, but quite a lot actually are in the realm of history for us and memory. And I think one of the points that was being made was about social connectedness, both individual connectedness and isolation, and also just a sense of community. And what we see is quite a significant growth, I think, in the interests of people in their local community, in their local surround, how it has been, how it has changed over time. And that's something which we know through COVID, that the importance of social connectedness really helped the resilience of that community. So they're very wide-ranging. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So one we funded was actually on the history of the chimney tax. So this does go back to the late 1700s. But it is looking at records. So the chimney tax, the hearth tax, was basically a progressive wealth tax. First one introduced in England, actually. Which, it was 2 shillings. You had to pay 2 shillings per hearth or stove that you had in your house. So why is this relevant? Because then you've got tax records, okay, bureaucracies, talk about ossification of bureaucracies, they're very good at keeping records. Means that you can go back and you can start tracing, well actually, where were the wealthy properties and what does that street look like now? And also, if people are trying to trace their genealogy, they've got a sense of where was their wealth and their status, in society, by literally how much tax are they paying, just how many chimneys do they have as an indication of how big their house was. and therefore what their work and their status was. And there's a project looking at the City of London and Greenwich actually comparing that to market towns that we live in. So there are different projects that we can do through that. But what it's allowed it, sorry, I was cheering my kids with doing sports events at the weekend, and I lost my voice, so I was yelling. One of them actually was at UL, actually, University of London, so I was going, go UL, for the weekend. What else? The other thing that we are looking at and thinking about is one of the other hats I wear is for another initiative, which is how academics, and this is what goes to universities, can take the knowledge that they have and really enable others to produce knowledge themselves with the same kind of rigorous standards that we would expect from academic research, so that we would, as an academic, you recognise that as knowledge because it's been collected in a particular way. It's an open platform. It's called Methods of Change. It was funded through another programme I run, Aspect, but that received money from UKRI to run that. Collaborative project led by University of Manchester, but it goes through a whole range of social science methodologies. It includes ethnography, includes others, and it's an open platform, as I say, for people to say, well, I need to find out, actually in quite a rigorous way, what an issue is, what the causes of that issue might be, and what appropriate solutions might be. So, again, providing that knowledge. And then one final point, I think it's quite interesting for us as funders to be careful that we don't perpetuate or buy into a sort of what I call an extractive model of knowledge, engagement, and impact. So, we all want to do loads of engagement and impact, and that's actually quite right. But there are ways of doing that which actually give back to the community that you're extracting that knowledge from, and ways of doing it which don't actually give back. And what we really need to focus on is ways which are inclusive and give back and don't adopt that, as I say, quite extractive model. So those are just a few ideas.
Oh, brilliant. And I should just tell the audience that the IHB has had funding from the British Academy to work with citizen scientists both in Kenya and in the Netherlands, for which we're grateful. Thank you. But also, I'm reminded of the fact that I think at the end of last year, when the Prime Minister's Council for Science and Technology asked the British Academy to do some work on how to get citizen engagement and trust and public interaction with science better.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, do you specifically to address global challenges, actually?
Yeah.
So, do you think that there's a particular role for citizen science in driving that agenda? Do you see that citizens, the way we're now reformulating, will actually help that process?
Oh, absolutely. So, this project is to look at the role that the trust that people have, not just in science. There's an awful lot of work on that. But in the role in science and policy making. So there's kind of two levels to the question. The first is, when do citizens think that actually policy makers should go to science to find an answer? Science is usually in this context seen as STEM. Okay, so it should go to medicine or it should go to climate scientists, etc. I've got a whole other spiel that I can do on when they should be going to social sciences and humanities on that, but I'll spare you that for later. But look, when should policymakers go to science to look for solutions? And then when they do go to science, do people trust the way that science is being used in policymaking, or do they think it's being used in a biased or partial way to sort of justify things that people wanted to do anyway? So it has this two layers to it, and so we've got two research teams out at the moment, looking at three issues. One is clean air, one is monkeypox, and the other is GM foods. So different levels of contestation around those issues, and absolutely citizen science will play a role in that because it involves also developing hypotheses, testing those hypotheses, revising those, and at every point then you have citizens involved in that process. So because you have to write about citizens' trust in policy making, how can you not involve citizens? But it's through that kind of multi-layer, quite rigorous, it's high participation, but it's got to be quite rigorous to be able to filter through, to be able to get some of the insights that we need to find solutions that actually won't suit everybody. And I think that's a little bit of a cutting edge on this, is how can we devised processes why people have participated, the solution is not actually one that they advocated, and yet they feel the process has been fair.
Yeah, that's a very difficult challenge. I mean, I think public trust in institutions and universities and so on is a major role for the British Academy in that regard, and especially because of the way in which citizen scientists themselves are beginning to shape the kinds of questions we can ask in the social sciences and the kind of answers that we get. I think that's a very important way forward. So let me turn now, Alison, to you. So, you know, the ESRC's overarching purpose is to create a more prosperous, healthy, sustainable and secure society. Right? So, I mean, what role do you see here for citizen science alongside the ESRC, universities and government? How do they slot into that strategy?
Sure. So, I mean, that's an ambitious vision. The one that you've just set out there. Yeah. It's clearly something that ESRC is the major funder of social science research in the UK cannot do on its own. So a huge part of what we do is about connecting all of the different parts of that research ecosystem, including wonderful funders like the British Academy. I mean, one thing that really strikes me, and has particularly struck me today, is that in my life at the ESRC, I work with people from all of the other scientific disciplines, and particularly the STEM disciplines. And I think for us, across the social sciences, one thing that really marks us out as different from most of those other disciplines is that we cannot do our work without people. Citizens, people, are at the absolute, they are the bedrock of what we do. So in many ways, I feel that already the sort of research methods we have embed the public really crucially right at the centre, whether you're thinking about a very small piece of ethnographic research or whether you're thinking about the kind of world I used to work in before I joined the ESRC, which was really large-scale surveys of people with tens of thousands of participants. And it's really interesting sitting here thinking about, okay, that's not citizen science, I appreciate that's not citizen science, it's science with citizens at the heart of it. What you're trying to do is to go one step beyond. Maybe we can talk in a moment about what that might look like for us. I mean, in terms of ESRC's role, I think that the key piece of the puzzle for us is that connecting piece. So we fund lots of fantastic work done across universities and other parts of the research system. That research for us ideally has to make a difference. It has to have an impact. And the way that we can help with that is by connecting that research through to the people who are going to be making use of it. So that might be policymakers at any level, from the national all the way down to the local authority level. It might be people working in service delivery, it might be people working within the third sector. And so I think for us, a key part of our role is trying to improve that flow through from the people doing the research all the way through to the people making use of it. And again, I can see that citizen science has a really key offer in that space, of really making sure that what those people who want to make use of that research are getting is something that really meets their needs.
Yeah, and I think what's very interesting there is that the vision that we are talking about today, that we have built and enacted and delivered on, it's not about consultation, it's not even about participation, right? It's one step beyond that. And we need to think about how to characterize that step, right? Bringing citizen science right into the heart of everything we do. And for those of you in the room who don't know, the ESRC have funded a research centre at UCL for work in Lebanon, for what is prosperity in the age of mass displacement, which has had the most magnificent outcome for citizen science, not only for training but for impact in the most important point, which is what is the question, the formulation, the starting point for all of this kind of research. And you're going to be hearing from that team in just a moment. But if I could come back and talk to you a little bit more about, I mean, the ESRC has successively over time invested more and more actually in citizen science work. Do you think that impetus has come from society, or has it come from other partners within the knowledge ecosystem, or has it come from the sort of scientists themselves? I mean, where's the impetus come from?
I think it's come from all three
of
those places. I think we as a funder are much more attuned to benefits that citizen science can bring. I think within the research community, there are people working in particular areas where they can see really clearly why it's not even about benefits, it's about it has to be a key part of their sort of remit, I suppose, as research and trying to do research on what are often very sort of difficult issues. And I mean, in terms of what I think we get, what I think the research community gets out of that kind of work, I mean, to some extent, it's about really improving the nature of the work that we do, making sure that we are asking the right questions. Somebody earlier on made a really critical point about groups who are less often heard within the research activity. So when I think about my background in the world of sort of large-scale survey research, we all know there are some groups who are just really hard to engage with big studies like that. No matter how you try on the doorstep, I can see citizen science as a really helpful way of both helping us think about how might you engage those groups and offering another way of actually reaching out to those groups. So to some extent, it's about improving the quality of what we do. And then I think there's another really important piece about sort of public understanding and trust in some of the research that's carried out. So picking up on Julia's point earlier on, there's a lot of work that we support now that is about using large-scale data about people that's collected as almost as a byproduct of the way people engage with public services, for example. And that data, it's out there, it can be linked together in a way that's both secure and safe, but is also incredibly powerful in terms of the research insights it gets. But I'm sure many of you are thinking, oh, that sounds ethically rather challenging. And so there's a huge piece of, I think, citizen science and engagement that we have undertaken as a research funder about really making sure that in building that sort of research infrastructure, we really understand people's concerns and we can try and mitigate. We can try and build in processes that sort of protect and reflect those anxieties that people might have.
Yes, that's really interesting because, of course, machine learning is enormously powerful. We'll come back onto that and the ethical issues that it raises for data sets at the moment. But just to going back, you mentioned your work and your studies. So one of the interesting things that the Citizen Science Academy is doing, of course, is it's part of the IGP's work on conducting modest prosperity in East London, which over 2021 to 2031, which is a longitudinal study, tracing the effects of large-scale and long-term urban regeneration on local communities and their household prosperity right across East London, so, and including Newham and so on. So this is a mixed method study, of course. But crucially, the citizen scientists are involved both in the qualitative and in the quantitative work. And I think bringing them into that space has really made a difference to the longitudinal study. So I just wondered what your thoughts are about doing that, because you've been doing massive longitudinal studies for ages. Could you imagine working with a whole team of scientists out there collecting your data, disrupting your ideas?
Absolutely. So, there is a tradition within the kind of longitudinal research community.
Yeah.
You've got the massive national studies like the cohorts that have been led out of UCL, which are fantastic resources. And then you also have a large array of smaller, more locally based studies. Some of you will have come across ALSMAC, which is the Avon longitudinal study of parents and children. It's born in Bradford, which is another fantastic example. And I think what has been really successful in the past for those locally orientated studies, it's been easier for them to engage with some of the sorts of questions that I think you're talking about, particularly those that come out of a health perspective where that sort of public-patient involvement is kind of written into their DNA. I think for the national studies, it's more challenging. They do go beyond engagement and working with the public. In the sense that there will be quite extensive consultation, obviously about some of the question areas that we want to cover, and also very extensive testing with the public of those questions. But ultimately, the public, as I said at the beginning, they're at the core of it in the sense of being key participants within the study, and without them, there would be nothing, we wouldn't have anything. So I think we could probably do more to build in some of that citizen science aspect, but citizens are at the core already, and that's really key.
All right, well, we'll tell you the answer when we've done it.
Excellent. Look forward to hang on
Until 2031. But just before we close, Julia, I wanted to come back to you in the British Academy, because you know the importance of promoting and defending social sciences and humanities. That is the understanding of society, the fundamental understanding of society. And working with citizen scientists, as I do on 4 continents, the issue here, I think, is understanding as well that has to be sustained over time. There has to be a golden thread that runs through that. There has to be a certain amount of patience so that this process can evolve, so that you get the best quality work when you've been collaborating over time. And you can't do it quickly. So what do you think the impact on the British Academy might be of understanding that longer term engagement? Because normally it's sort of in out, you do the project this year, project that year, and then
So for so the importance of that is long-term sustained funding.
yeah.
And the broader question on that is we receive most of our money actually comes from government, from the now DSIT, it's called, and we have had a series of just 1 year spending reviews. So you manage, like UCL, so you have to manage a 5-year project on 1 year money. And so that's a challenge, right? So you're pre-committed budgets before they even come in. So you're doing it a little bit on the wing and a breath.
Yeah.
I used to chair the audit committee, so it's a fairly interesting question. Conversation to the auditors as to whether we were solvent or not. But you actually need that very long-term funding. And so when a lot of that used to come through a budget called the Global Challenges Research Fund, which is actually part of the ODA budget in the British government, when that was suddenly cut like this, that was devastating. Absolutely devastating. I mean, for most of our British Academy projects, the way that we ran it, we didn't have anything actually in mid-flight. But if you've got projects like that in mid-flight, then you've built up partners on the ground, you've built up trust, you've built up connections, you've built up reliance, you've built up dependence, and then all of a sudden you disappear. That's going to take a long time to come back. That was damage that has been done, that is going to take a long time to rebuild.
Yeah, very well. And I know because I was leading one of those projects when that was cut.
Yeah.
So I have to say that one of my proudest moments is that nobody lost their job. When that cut was made in that massive project. That was a huge ask, but that was what I wanted to do, is just make sure that nobody lost their job, so that we would be able to come back one day when that was there. Great. Well, we've had a wonderful conversation. I just want you to join me in thanking Professor Julia Brack and Professor Alison Hart.